a leader in the emergent new generation of Chaco scholars. Robert Warner is received his BA from Brown and is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate. He's a PhD student at the University of Colorado in Boulder and soon will be done with his degree. He's worked in a number of areas, but his focus has been on the ancestral Pueblo of the northern Southwest. He's received a number of awards, and I will point out one of them is the Hayden Student Paper Award, which the Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society presented to him in 2015. And we are all happy and pleased that he has decided to be in Tucson, at least for the time being, to write his dissertation. The title of his talk is Monumental Avenues of the Chaco World, New Research at the Crossroads of Infrastructure, Ontology, and Power. It's bound to be a really interesting and exciting talk. And Rob, have at it.
Okay. Well, I want to say thanks again to everyone at AAHS, and especially Fran and Paul for inviting me to give this talk and organizing everything, and to everybody who's tuned in from, I imagine, all across the country. I'm delighted that I can share some of the results of the fieldwork I've been conducting over the last 3 years to document Chacoan roads throughout the San Juan Basin and beyond. So with no further ado, let's start off on the road. But before doing so, I want to wish everybody a happy solstice. This photo is from last night when I was privileged to be part of a group led by Anna Sofer and the Solstice Project. We got to be at Aztec ruins and witness the alignment of the long back wall of that great house with the setting solstice sun, conduct an interview with Patuch Gilbert from Acoma Pueblo. So I just wanted to wish everybody a solstice will, the official scientific solstice will be occurring tomorrow, but we're very close. The sun has reached its southern home. So solstice tidings to all, and happy holidays as well. As a means of a brief outline, background of how this lecture will proceed, I'll begin with a very brief background. I'm going to assume most people know about Chaco, and we could really get bogged down with all the details and debates and extensive scholarship that's been conducted on this fascinating place. So I'll sort of fly through an intro to Chaco, proceed with providing background, especially around the buzzwords that I've thrown into the title: ontology, infrastructure, power, so forth. And then we'll get right into it. And I'm going to take us on very sort of experiential tours around two of the approximately 12 sites that I documented for my dissertation and will be including. We'll take a close look at two and get a sense of how are people probably moving through these sites, and what sorts of practices are roads facilitating? What are people actually doing on them? That will be the penultimate section of this talk. We'll close with looking at processions and races and practices of offerings that I think we have very compelling evidence, both from archaeology, from discussions with Native colleagues, and looking through ethnography, to talk about some of the ways roads are being used. And finally, I'll close with some musings on the relationship between roads and power in the Chaco world. So very briefly, this is the location of Chaco Canyon near the center of the San Juan Basin. As you can see from this image, it doesn't immediately jump out as being an eminently hospitable locale. There are green mountains ringing Chaco in all directions, right, by virtue of it being a basin. And yet you can see the real absence of greenery and vegetation in the interior basin and Chaco in specific. Here's a picture in the canyon itself. There's a debate, certainly a fierce debate right now regarding the extent of agricultural productivity in the canyon, how many people were living there. I'm not going to go down that road. We'll stick to other roads tonight. But suffice it to say that based on my reading of the evidence, it appears to be a very challenging place for agriculture, very short growing season, extreme temperature swings, poor soils, and probably people are not being drawn there as a sort of fertile valley, though there's certainly a strong argument by another group of scholars. So take what you will of that debate, but doesn't seem like the greatest place to live. You could definitely conduct better agriculture in the Chuscas or the Red Mesa Valley. And yet here in Chaco, people chose made the conscious decision to construct these monumental buildings known as great houses, Pueblo Bonito being the most famous of which. It's not just Pueblo Bonito, though. In Chaco, we have at least 12 great houses in the canyon. In this image, you can see the variation in orientations among the different great houses, and yet patterning within that variation. The work by the Solstice Project and Anna Sofer have shown very compellingly that these different orientations are related to astronomical positions of the sun, and especially at Chaco, the moon. Here's an example of the moon setting in alignment with Tetractyle. I'm sure everybody knows of the famous and incredible Sundagger petroglyph on Fajada Butte as well. So much of what would appear to have been a central concern of the Chacoan, whatever it was, the Chacoan dream, the Chaco experiment, was commemorating these astronomical cycles through the monumental architecture. It seems to have been very important. We also know that Chaco was not an equal society. Of course, we can question if there ever was anything like an equal society. The new Graeber and Wengrow book that I'm sure many are reading over the holiday break is raising some very challenging but fascinating discussions in that regard. Anyhow, I digress. Here at Chaco, there's clear evidence, I would say, through osteology, especially through architecture, of inequality, that there are massive great houses with small numbers of people living in them who are healthier and buried with wondrous riches, and living on the other side of the canyon in small houses that don't overwhelm you with their monumental grandeur and mass, are these small sites, the BC sites where the majority of the population is living. So Chaco is, and this is the first really overt expression of inequality we're seeing in the ancient Southwest. Another part of what grabs so many of us about Chaco. But it's not just the canyon, it's not just Pueblo Bonito and these wonderful great houses in Chaco itself, but there's a large, some might say system, some might say pattern of Chaco style architecture spread across this huge region, about 100,000 square kilometers. We're talking about an area the size of Ohio, with replications of what would appear to be very standardized, iconic Chacoan architectural templates. Researchers debate, is this a unified polity? Is this a sort of network of emulation? Again, we won't get into the minutia of that debate, but suffice it to say that Chaco is doing something compelling. Lots of people are buying into it, and a lot of what that pattern has to do with is monumental architecture embodied in these great houses and the roads we'll be talking about tonight. So why do we care about roads? What makes Chaco a quote phenomenon? I hesitate to use the phrase Chaco phenomenon because I prefer to think we can get at a more specific and precise description of the pattern of what I would say is really a shared religious vision being carried out and built throughout the Four Corners region in this Chaco period, between starting about early 800s in the canyon through to the end of the 1100s. But what makes this phenomenon? Why, when Chaco is in the title of a talk, do people choose to sign up? Well, often it's these two issues of monumentality. Why are people building these massive buildings, the likes of which were not seen before or after in the ancient Southwest? And this question of inequality, seeing that in the time of Chaco, we're seeing a very unequal society, and what's driving that, and why was that happening, and why in later periods of Pueblo and Navajo history, our societies organized so differently than what we see in this Chaco era. What do roads tell us about that? Well, I'm playing with this idea in tonight's lecture of roads as infrastructure, which is where many of our minds would jump, I believe, in talking in hearing that word, of road, right? We think of roads being part of infrastructure. So I just did a very simple, first thing that came up on Google searching infrastructure, the basic physical and organizational structures and facilities, roads being listed, needed for the operation of a society or an enterprise. Other facets noted in discussions of infrastructure would be the fact it's usually the creation of something that's considered infrastructure requires large groups of people. It's something shared throughout usually a state or a large political entity, and it requires some organization from some kind of a leader or probably a centralized authority to say, this is how we're going to lay out all of this infrastructure, be it piping, electrical lines, or, in the contemporary world, or in the case of Chaco, these roads that are associated with many great houses, and especially extensive here in downtown Chaco, as shown in my mentor and colleague Rich Friedman's fantastic and sort of mind-boggling model. But what I want to emphasize is historically in discussions of Chaco and roads, that notion of roads as infrastructure may have led us astray. The idea that these are just for, we think of infrastructure in our society, and that immediately goes into notions of economics and energetics and so forth. But we have to remember that infrastructure is always existing within a cultural tissue, a cultural milieu of meaning and of how people think about the world. And of course, as this definition highlights, infrastructure is what's needed for the operation of a society or something. So that raises the question, well, what was it that Chaco was doing? What would their infrastructure be facilitating? And that's the question we're going to explore tonight. And that leads us into the second word I had in the title, which is ontology. There's a huge discussion in archaeology right now. Some people are talking about an ontological turn, that archaeologists are becoming more interested in the fact that many extra modern or non-Western cultures think about a lot more things than the contemporary West does as being alive and imbued with agency and power. Others have critiqued this ontological turn, and I think rightfully so, saying we don't want to get so far out in objects and so forth causing cultural change that we forget about very real human social dynamics. But overall, these are debates about the nature of being and really about worldview. What do people think is an actor in the world, and what do different societies or different individuals within a society value as an entity able to cause change? So I put examples on this slide of some things in the Chacoan world that to us we may think of as inert matter, inert landscape, or sort of non-humans without some kind of personhood, and that given a wide variety of evidence from societies across the world, across space and time, many of these things are the types of actors and agents that in the Chacoan world may have been considered very powerful, very potent, and very central to why you might create an infrastructure. Creating, in other words, infrastructure not just to transport goods for economically efficient reasons, as our minds may immediately jump to, but because the moon is something very powerful. The moon is something related to water and fertility and so forth. And to create a road aligning with it, or a different astronomical body, or a powerful landform, is of equal importance in your society working the way it should. So that's why I've sort of woven together these two ideas of infrastructure and ontology in tonight's title and tonight's lecture. Finally, power, another very major concept, but we hear about a lot of inequalities. This is a hot topic, of course, because of the troubling and dismal state of our contemporary world. And one of the major anthropological questions has always been, why do societies develop inequalities? Power, of course, playing into that is the ability to get others to do something. And I want to, again, play with the concept of power tonight, not to just think of sort of political authority, but to recognize that in pre-contact North America and many, many societies, power in the political sense is intimately connected with another way that power is talked about among many indigenous societies of powerful objects, powerful landscapes, which are things we might call religious, a sacred site that is imbued with power. And those who are associated with these places, with powerful objects, with powerful knowledge, develop authority and leadership within societies. So again, we could talk about this all night, but I couldn't say it I certainly cannot say it any better than Paul Pino does in the wonderful Solstice Project documentary, The Mystery of Chaco Canyon, when he says, in our history, we talk of things that occurred a long time ago of people who had enormous amounts of power, spiritual power, and power over people. So this is certainly an element of Chacoan society seen very clearly through archaeology, but I also find it very important to emphasize, talked about in native descriptions of Chaco from both Navajo people and Pueblo people, the idea that at Chaco, some people accumulated lots of power, and we see that very clearly archaeologically and partially through the roads. So I decided in designing my dissertation to ask, so much work has been done on roads. There's been pioneering work, especially by the Bureau of Land Management and associated researchers in the 1980s. John Stein, John Roney, Mike Marshall, and Anna Sofer really led the way in showing roads connecting to striking land features like we see in this image at the end, or perhaps one of the ends of the North Road in Puts Canyon. And while there was a lot of very field-focused research on roads in the 1980s, especially, in subsequent decades, there's been much less. Ruth Van Dyke has done some wonderful work on roads in the canyon, talking about the experience of moving along them, different views that roads would have facilitated, how they would have guided movement, which has guided my movement in my dissertation to think about how I wanted to approach roads. And the way I'm approaching them is asking, what do we actually find on roads? So much research has been from the air. Roads are very hard to see, but they appear through aerial imagery, especially when the sun angles low, roads will pop out, or using new remote sensing technologies like LiDAR. This is fantastic and very important to discover where roads are and create a record of them. But how were they being used? What did they mean in the culture? I think we can only go so far looking at roads in a disembodied sense from above. We need to get on the ground, walk them. And so the question I'm asking in my dissertation is, what is along these roads? What sorts of architecture and artifacts do we find on roads? And what does that tell us about how they were being used and possibly what practices were being carried out along them? I realize a slide got deleted that had all the information, a nice image of a road from above. So anyway, I apologize for that. So what has been my approach to studying roads in my dissertation at University of Colorado Boulder? Well, it's a very, shall we say, multidimensional approach. We use emerging recent digital technologies like LiDAR, light detection and ranging, and structure for motion photogrammetry with a drone, also drones to capture aerial photos. And I have to give a big shout out to Rich Friedman again, who's really led the way on using cutting edge technologies to document roads since the early 2000s. And he's really been a guide and really helped with this, the digital approach and the field as well. So we take an area that I'm interested in, we look at the LiDAR, then we'll go out and fly the drone over it to create a digital surface model. With that map, where roads that would be very subtle become enhanced through the use of these digital technologies. We then go back on the ground and follow these road alignments and see what's along them. Where are they pointing? Where are they going? What kind of artifacts? So that those are then mapped with GPS and also recording in-field observations of relationships to landforms, etc. And we're also, an important part of working with roads is talking with descendant Native people from Navajo Nation. Much of our work is taking place on Navajo sites. I want to give a huge thank you to Navajo Nation Heritage and Historic Preservation Division. And Navajo oral traditions hold a lot of knowledge and information about roads that we are integrating into the understandings with our field work. And of course, working with Pueblo colleagues as well, going to site visits with members from the Pueblo of Acoma and extensive literature reviews of discussions of roads, pathways in both Pueblo and Diné ethnography, and also taking a look cross-culturally, because roads monumentalized, formalized ritual roadways are not unique to the ancient Southwest. They appear all throughout the ancient world and with some overriding patterns. I won't be talking about that tonight, but that is an aspect of my dissertation as well, is putting roads into a comparative perspective. So these images just show LiDAR, how you can see roads from above with the technology, and some of our team members. It's Rich Friedman, Andrew Fowler, John Stein, and then two friends and colleagues from Navajo Nation, Olson John and Odell John. This is just a list of sites for the Chaco nerds that I've worked at for my dissertation project. I won't linger on this slide, but in case people are curious, I wanted to target sites in all 4 directions from the canyon and that were in use before the height of monumentality in Chaco, during the sort of Chaco golden century, and in the post-Chaco era. And we have roads in all those periods, which you'll see in the following examples. So I'm going to take us now on a walk through one of my favorite sites, which is called Llave de la Mano, which is along the South Road. This is just a Google Earth image showing the pathway of the Chaco South Road. It's one of the most studied and from the BLM research in the 1980s and follow-up work conducted through the Solstice project by Mike Marshall and John Roney. We are going to be looking at Llave de la Mano, which is not a great house, but a monumental earthen platform located near, fairly close to the southern terminus of the South Road. So Llave de la Mano, this is an image from LiDAR where you can, let me put on my, the South Road comes in, it very clearly comes into the site, both from the north and the south. There is a moderately sized Basque Maker 3 village on the mesa top above. The site has the name Soso. There's a number of pit structures and slab-lined upright slab cists. And this is, so that's all on the mesa top. Down below, built against the talus, is this earthen constructed platform and a large herradura. So we're going to spend most of our time looking at the Llave de la Mano complex, but keep in mind that there is a moderately sized Basque Maker structure above. There's another Basque Maker era 3 structure here, which we'll touch on briefly. But the road, you can see very clearly in the LiDAR, goes straight to the platform. And this, I just put this quote to highlight that there's a lot of confusion out there in the Chacoan literature, like this assertion that the road doesn't go near or even adjacent, doesn't go to Llave de la Mano. With LiDAR, we can see and ground truthing that very clearly it does. This is the original map that John Stein and Daisy Levine and Fred Niles made in the 1980s, which was excellent, but we've been fortunate to use newer technologies now. So here is an aerial image of the location. You can see the platform here, the herradura, and the road trajectory, which I will highlight. Taking that drone imagery, we can create what's using structure for motion photogrammetry, create a 3D digital model of the surface where you can see, for example, terracing on the platform. The herradura really jumps out. And this is the image that I've annotated for this talk, and I'm going to walk us through to get the experience of, okay, if somebody's on the South Road walking either from Chaco South or from south north towards Chaco and they approach the site, what will they be experiencing? How will their movement be guided by this road, and what might it be all about? So we're going to start with what I've circled in white, the platform itself. Here's a view of it from the ground. There are lines of stones that create a sort of a slow erosion, but they also create a very a sense of monumental loft that, and there's been lots of earth piled to create this platform at the base of the cliffs. Here's a view of it from above. You can see these very prominent and distinct lines of stones, and as well as a sort of staircase area leading up to the top. You can also see here this use of purple hued rock to create a herradura, which is our crescent stone features, often thought of as shrines, very commonly associated or quite well associated with Chacoan roads. There's one on top of the platform here made out of this distinctive purple rock, which is not outcropping in the immediate area, so it's being brought in. Here's a closer view of that purple rock used to create the Herradura on top of the platform, and just a closer up view. So there's something interesting going on here with color and particular stones, thinking back to that notion of ideology, ontology, but ideology as well, that I brought up earlier. The choice of a particular color, we might think, oh, it's just aesthetic, but it probably has deep cultural meaning. This was, excuse me, John Stein's wonderful drawing from the, again, original documentation showing what the platform may have looked like. The staircase is clearly there. It was noted both by Marshall and Roney and by us upon revisit, and then the Herradura on top and the Herradura below. We're going to now look at the lower Herradura, which is this feature circled in white. Looks like this from one direction. It's a sort of curious shape. Most Herraduras are more of a crescent or sometimes closer to a J. This is a very distinct teardrop shape. Here's standing at the base of it, looking back up towards the platform. So there's that's the lower Herradura. From the platform, it appears that one purpose of building it may have been to facilitate access to this natural upper bench above. You can see here that the topography, that here is the cliff edge, the platform built against the cliff, and then this cleared off natural sort of embayment or bench above. There's a way in which a person could climb up to get up onto this upper bench, and what is found there? Very little. That upper bench is cleared off. There's not a lot of talus accumulation. You don't find artifacts, but what is found, strikingly, I think, right, shown here in the image, is a moderately sized, maybe a meter and a half long sandstone boulder with fossils appearing in it. Fossils are present in that part, and this really stands out. It does not appear that it would have naturally eroded into that location. It appears to have been placed, and it's sort of subtle and humble, and yet the only thing that the only feature on that upper platform. So it may be that this was considered a very important, notable feature that the platform was at some level built to pay homage to or to respect. But there's certainly, it's the focal point on that upper natural platform. We're going to now look at these. So as the road approaches the site, we know the solid yellow lines show where we know it is. Swales are visible, or berms, or shared scatters. The dotted lines I've inferred, but I feel very confident that there are spur roads at those locations. And I'm going to focus in on this area where the road passes near the platform. I've circled in brown these curious natural outcroppings that form two parallel rows. You can see here, they form these two parallel rows, and they look human-made. They're circular. They're kind of, the stones look upright, and as an archaeologist, you're out there and the mind, it catches your eye, and your mind thinks, "Gosh, what is that little rock ring?" But these are all natural. They're natural occurrences and outcrops, but totally striking. And they form this natural parallel corridor, which would channel movement. And I think these were considered very interesting and important by the ancient Chacoans, that they chose to have the road pass between these striking, somewhat human-looking, but not rock features that are natural in the landscape. Really fascinating. And again, speaks to the role of natural landforms as being part of what the roads are addressing and recognizing, just as was shown with an early work by the Solstice project, with the North Road going to Coots Canyon, the South Road going to Hosta Butte, Ashichleba Road going to Black Lake, a sort of watery place, and many other examples that have been noted. But here it seems, the road is very interested in these striking and eye-catching natural outcroppings that sort of bridge the human and the, whatever we want to call that, the natural, the world beyond just what people are creating. And yet those two fuse into each other, they blend, they merge. You can see here how they create spaces too, along which spur roads lead from that main road alignment, which is here, and John Stein is standing, showing he's standing in that main road alignment, and here is where one of the spur roads comes off past the Herradura leading up to the platform. There's an alternate view. You can see the outcrops here and here. There's a slight swale, and that road goes directly to the platform and the stairway within the platform. And there's just an aerial view to show these features a little more clearly from above and how they create these wonderful parallel lines that really lead a person into that really prescribed movement. We're now going to look up in this area here, where is the first of a number of small features we're going to look at tonight. There are many very subtle, small scale features on Chaco and roads that there could be a lot of categories. These haven't really been brought forth in the literature up to this point. John Stein noted them in some early work, but we're calling them boxes. These are about 1 meter square features, very commonly found alongside roads. This is one that's on the Llave de la Mano, and they're often found as one is approaching a site but hasn't quite reached the main great house. And they make a rectangle or a square about 1 meter size, and there's very compelling patterning across the Chaco world of these small box-like features on a road before it reaches the main attraction, or say the main great house. This is one at Llave de la Mano. There's an alternate view of it showing a little more of this square configuration. We'll see more boxes later on, but I am pausing because these are the types of features that I think can give us a hint of, oh, somebody moving on these roads is going to stop at a place like this and make some kind of observance, whether it's leaving an offering or stating something or just pausing. These boxes are always positioned on, at these points of transition between being on a road and then approaching whatever is on the other side of that box, usually a great house, or in this case, a platform. What is the chronology of the site? Many are probably wondering. Well, it's challenging and fascinating because there are, it's clearly a multi-component site. We have a robust Basket Maker 3 assemblage on the platform. In some cases, like the sherd shown on the left-hand side there, Basket Maker 3 sherds are being excavated up by rodents out of subsurface deposits. So it would appear Basket Maker materials in this area for a long time. You also have an equally robust Chaco era assemblage with Gala black and white and red mesa and so forth. So this was an area in use for a long time. It's possible that it could be argued that the Basket Maker sherds are eroding down from the village, but it's at least a mile away. Surely some are probably eroding down, but there are enough that I think they're not background noise, but that this was an area of use in Basket Maker 3 times, subsequently in Chaco era, and even as late as Pueblo 3. In the Herradura, there's one shown on the right-hand side of the image. There's one sherd of Mesa Verde black on white, a bull. You can see it's just textbook there. And again, some might argue it eroded down into the Herradura. There's only 2 sherds in the Herradura, and this one was not right in the center, but it would appear to have been, placed in the Herradura. It was certainly brought there. There's only one Mesa Verde black on white sherd. It was brought by somebody to this location, perhaps as an offering. So people are using this location from around 500-600 perhaps to the late 1200s. With, at what point was the road formalized? At what point was the platform built? It's not clear to say, but I do think something like the platform or an early version of it could have been constructed in the Basket Maker era, given the fact we have Basket Maker sherds coming up in rodent holes from within the platform itself. And the history of this location goes well beyond. This is a Hogan Ring, a Navajo Hogan Ring, in the corridor of the South Road, just a little bit north of the platform. We hear often, Navajo people stay away from these types of sites. And that's certainly true for, many of the Navajo people that I've encountered while working on Navajo Nation. But there's certainly other cases where people have connections to these sites, where people have knowledge about these locations and choose to build hogans, their homes in the South Road, adjacent to this Chaco era, at least, platform. And so I just think this is a fascinating bit of history that not only does the site probably go back to Basque Maker 3, it extends well into more recent times. So this is a location we just looked at, Llave de la Mano. If we head south, past a location, a site here I'm not going to take time to talk about because it's, it would bog us down, but it's called Road Cut Ruin. It was initially identified and interpreted as a Basque Maker habitation that the road came plowing through and partially destroyed. Upon re-examination multiple times and careful mapping, we've concluded that does not appear to be the case. There are a set of slab-lined sort of box and cysts on one side of the road alignment. There's a small earthwork, midden berm, the likes of which are seen on many Chacoan roads on the other side, but it only has Basque Maker sherds. And in the middle, there's no indication that any site has been cut. It appears that there are these Basque Maker features intentionally flanking the road alignment, suggesting this may have been a pathway from much earlier period than we think people are constructing Chacoan roads. And we know, of course, there's major Basque Maker 3 sites in Chaco Canyon at Chabik and Site 423 at Kinya'a, the terminus of the road. There's a large Basque Maker 3 Great Kiva. So at least the road may have originally been a special ritual avenue going from this location where there's a Basque Maker 3 village, this formalized platform, south to Kinya'a, where you have a Basque Maker 3 Great Kiva. And of course, so this is just showing the locations again, Llave de la Mano. The road continues to Kinya'a, where you have a later Chacoan structure with a tower kiva. You have a Basque Maker 3 era Great Kiva and a huge habitation area. And beyond it, the road goes to a Herradura with a striking view. There's Kinya'a with a striking view of Hosta Butte, which is still a very important site to Navajo people. And Mike Marshall and Anna Sofer made the argument years ago that the South Road was built to commemorate this, towering, soaring, wondrous landform to the south, especially in balance to the Coots Canyon connection to the North Road in the north. But what I'm suggesting is from this was a corridor in use for centuries. Movements along it always had meaning and were important practices, and those related probably to various things. They may have related to that fossil boulder up top, to those striking, strange circular outcroppings, but also the wondrous and prominent Hosta Butte, still revered today at the end of that road. So just summing up, what have we learned about Llave de la Mano? Well, what I'm suggesting is we have a processional route from certainly during the Chaco era, probably before and seemingly after, as evidenced by the Mesa Verde sherd between Llave de la Mano and Kinya'a. It's highlighting for us the importance of landforms, as I was saying, the fossil boulder, the rock outcrops, Hosta Butte, and practices we see happening on here. Well, I would imagine processions or some kind of ritual movements between the two locations as guided along the road, but also offerings, the deposition of, why are sherds appearing at this site, which is not a habitation site? Well, they're probably being brought there and deposited intentionally. Sherds, again, in a different worldview, have meaning, may have power, and are not just what we think of sort of, as background trash. Some cases maybe they are, but in a place like this, I see many of these deposited as offerings. Excuse me a moment while I take a sip of water. We're now going to look at two sites that are located very close to one another, called Chambers Great House and the Taylor Springs Big House. Just for scale, there I am standing on top of it. It's a massive outlier far to the west, circled in red here. It's in Arizona on Navajo lands. This was the original map by John Stein and Andrew Fowler. You can see Chambers up here with a variety of roads spoken out from it. And then down here, the later site. So Chambers is, in around 1000, the sort of classic Chaco era, 1050. Taylor Springs is in use in the 1200s, so a much later site, and yet they're connected by a road. This is the notion of time bridges introduced by John Stein and Andrew Fowler, or the fact that in many cases we have roads connecting sites not being used in the same era. So I was really excited to revisit this site and take a closer look at what the roads were doing. So we're just going to do a little fade from, again, the original documentation into what we've accomplished with the drone and structure for motion. You can see a very similar pattern and just how much earth was moved, these immense earthworks and deeply excavated roads. And again, this idea of roads spoking off in different directions. There's the aerial photo. Oh, aerial photo, well, we'll move on. I've highlighted in yellow here, again, some of these small scale features that I think are really key and so easily missed on roads that give us hints about what's going on and how they're used. So we'll look at the first one here, circled in white. Pointed to with a white arrow here, you see just again how incredibly deep this road is, how much earth was moved leading up to the Great House. And this is what that feature looks like on the ground. Again, this is something that we would call a box. Again, just about 1 meter by 1 meter. Deposition of stones in a roughly rectangular formation. They haven't just eroded into this position from the Great House. This is an intentional feature, very subtle, easily missed, and yet, again, positioned right where you'd expect it. Just going to jump back at that sort of liminal boundary between road approaching a Great House and then that inner area within the earthworks. So we have another one of these boxes. We'll jump now to this one, which is another box. You can see here is the Great House. Here's the box and another feature that I call a gate. So we can see this better. This is one that I have mapped at this point, and so I can show it a little more clearly. See here, it looks like probably 2 contiguous cells, and down here, a linear arrangement of stones across the roadway. This is features we've been referring to as gates. They're very frequently found in association with these features we call boxes, which are single course lines of stones running across a road alignment. Now, of course, they're not going to stop anybody. This is a single course of stones. This is more of a symbolic marker. I think of it as, John Stein suggested the idea like yellow lines on the road. There's no physical barrier, but you definitely don't want to cross onto the other side. So something along those lines is probably happening with these gate features where you're coming in on the road and again, you stop. Your movement is inhibited, at least symbolically, by this line. Continue past it. There's this box feature. Maybe something is left. Can't say exactly without excavating them, which is not going to happen, and then proceeding to the Great House. And there's that map again, just without the imagery underneath for a clearer view. And there's the box on the ground. Finally, we'll look at this, which is a different kind of road associated feature we find throughout the region. There's an aerial of it. This is 9 meters. So this is a fairly substantial structure, probably of 4 to 5 rooms. We call these road rooms, which are things that look like what you might think of as a unit pueblo, but they lack any substantial midden deposit. And they're often found in association with roads, 4 to 5 room structures. So much more significant than boxes. They're small buildings alongside roads, but without the, midden domestic refuse that you would expect with a habitation site. So this one is located on this sort of spur road that comes out off of the Great House and ends in this bulbous area where there's another small road room structure and a small kiva. So that's what a road room looks like. You can see it on the ground here alongside the road. We're now going to travel down this Time Bridge Road to get to Taylor Springs. And these are just images showing the depth, Rich Friedman and John Stein. A few others, Scott Ortman's in there. So you can see the present ground surface and then just how deeply this road was excavated, huge amounts of effort. And it brings you down to Taylor Springs, again, a 1200s era structure. We had trouble finding any substantial nickel deposit here. There may be one somewhere, but it doesn't appear this building was used very much. And in the initial map, the road that shows the road going straight to the building, we've been able to determine the road, in fact, actually goes right here past the building. At a subsequent period in the historic times, a dam was actually built across the road to slow erosion, which shows you just how monumental indeed it was. So the road initially went past this structure wasn't here, but the road came down to this area where there's a spring, which we'll get to. So the road, before it was a time bridge, which it certainly was, appeared to begin at Chambers and go down to the spring. But we're going to zoom in on this yellow dot here, which is a feature we discovered recently. Again, a newly found small scale road feature that gives us a sense of movement and people's embodied experience. Zooming in, and you see here just what looks like a rubble concentration of stones, but standing on the ground surface, you can see the slope, and this is very clearly a stairway. Looks like stairways seen on a handful of Chaco roads with nice parallel lines and going down a slope. You can see John and Rich examining the stairway there, and just another view of it. But it leads down to, the stairway is right there, and it takes you down to this area where there's a spring known as Taylor Spring. Has a Navajo name as well, and is described in numerous Navajo oral traditions. I won't talk about the details here, but it's an important location, and that appears to be the, again, destination of this road, accessed from both buildings, that it's leading, again, to a spring, which has, of course, maybe a variety of meanings. It can be a place to collect water that we need for life, but it could also be the home of important beings. Water is so important in the Southwest and the focus of so much ceremonial life among Pueblo and Navajo people, that the road leading to a spring is a multi-dimensional, multifaceted occurrence, but highly significant. And the road does not continue beyond the spring. So takeaways, there are time bridges, roads connecting sites across eras. Is this a political statement? Is this part of a religious practice? We could go on and on about the potential meanings, but there's clearly time bridge roads. There's these small road-related architectural features that are suggesting stops and practices occurring along roads, that it's not just the road corridor, but these small features that stop how you move, maybe where you leave an object, or various other possibilities. The importance of water and springs and roads connecting to them. And again, here I see evidence for both processions and offerings, these small scale features. So I'm going to close with some thoughts on practices on Chaco roads. So how are they being used? What are people doing on roads? Again, I'm so inspired to think about the roads at the human level, as opposed to just in this disembodied fashion from above. And there have been hints of what people are doing on roads scattered throughout various writings, but little sort of systematic investigation. So I hope to be offering a contribution by exploring some of these. So one would be the very practice of constructing the road. This is a large group effort, probably being coordinated by somebody who knows this is how wide the road is supposed to be. This is where the road is supposed to go. This is the way we do it. There are always culturally specific ways and practices and knowledge of how to do something the right way. And road construction was no different. We have pretty uniform road widths and clearly similarities in road associated features and destinations across this vast Chacoan world. Would have been a lot of sweat, a lot of effort digging with sticks and baskets, piling the earth. Roads were up. There's at least one instance on the North Road where we know the road was repaired. There's evidence of sweeping roads in Chaco. So also, once built, roads would have been the locus of activity, at least for upkeep and maintenance. And a person's role relative, are you the person who gets to process down the road? Are you the one who upkeeps the road? Do you get to participate in road construction? Those have social consequences. So just thinking about the very creation and maintenance of roads gives us a sense of some ways that this inequality in the Chaco world may have arisen or been perpetuated, perhaps. Of course, another thing, just quickly on the maintenance of roads that I've been thinking a lot about is how they could not be used in the monsoon season or for probably a few months after the snow had melted. Those who have worked out in the Chaco region know just how incredibly slippery and muddy and mucky those clay-rich soils become. You know, your feet become giant, you're sort of can't walk because it clings to the feet, and movement across the landscape when the ground is wet is very challenging, if not impossible. Roads are these low features, water would have pooled in them. They wouldn't have been useful for carrying goods and trade and transport or really any kind of movement in those wet times. But I think that may have been the point at times, to have these waterlogged features, again, giving the importance of moisture, rain, water in native worldviews and rituals and what's important in the Southwest. You know, having these water-filled roads may have been very significant at times. There's breakage of what appears to be the intentional deposition of broken ceramics along roads, sometimes in massive quantities. I show on the right a section of the Great North Road I documented for my dissertation, where there's somewhere around 600 sherds in about a half mile, you know, not a very long distance, but sorry, my face is covering the scale bar there, but I know overall it's certainly not more than a mile, and we have about 600 sherds. They are not pot drops, and there aren't sherds fitting back together. So I'm thinking, you know, are people breaking sherds ahead of time? Are they collecting broken sherds off of a midden, maybe in Chaco Canyon, and walking out to these locations and depositing them? I'm running a variety of statistical tests and comparing these dense sherd assemblages from the North Road, from parts of the West Road, and elsewhere to see, you know, are certain sherds being preferentially deposited. But this is a, you know, are people, is it just a way to mark the road, as Kathy Cameron and Steve Lexon have suggested? Are these offerings? Are they both? Are they neither? I'm beginning to ask these questions, but certainly there's a clear pattern that broken pots are being scattered along roads. There are no sites anywhere in the vicinity of this location, the 600 sherds on the road. Processions. Various researchers have talked about the possibility of processions on Chacoan roads, especially Ruth Van Dyke led the way, raising this idea first. But I've been thinking more about it. We know processions are probably happening in the ancient Southwest, as evidenced by, for example, the procession panel in Southeast Utah. And processions are, you know, striking, sensory, wondrous performances where, you know, people will be dressed differently and often involving music, and they're arenas for social display. How people, you know, line up. Do you get to participate in the procession or do you watch? They're really multifaceted practices. And not only is there these elements related to power and inequality and so forth, but so often the purpose of a procession or a different kind of ritual movement is to travel to a important location, a powerful place, something akin to a pilgrimage, or at least certainly a form of ritualized movement that I think more so than, you know, people doing bulk transport along roads, it's these ritualized movements and processions that are happening on them and recursively feeding back into creating Chacoan society. I'm going to skip these images, which are more boxes in the interest of time, but just a sense that part of that ritualized movement are these small scale features that are telling people, you know, a certain act needs to happen here, you stop here. John Stein noted these very early on at Kin Ho Choi, offering boxes, gates, roadside rooms, and these are things we're finding all throughout the Chaco world. Just going to skip these examples in the interest of time, but they're at Kinijoni, where the road, one of the roads, you know, leads off towards a prominent peak. You can really imagine a ritualized movement there. At the reservoir site, where there's a box and a gate right where the road enters the Great House. And even at the Dittert site, whereas a road is coming into this area in front, you have a road box and a gate. So there's some kind of ritualized procedure for moving on these features. Finally, I've been thinking about races, which we know, you know, Peter Nabokov's book and many other references to the importance of running in native cultures in the Southwest, Navajo and Pueblo, And they have different purposes and meanings sometimes, but especially, it can have a wide variety of meanings, often ceremonial in nature. And there are specific exact references in Navajo oral traditions, especially stories of the Great Gambler, to races happening on Chaco Roads. I put some quotes up here, and even the kick stick race, excuse me. This was a very exciting finding, not only because of the potential of thinking about running on roads and races and ceremony, but also competition. And so like the kick stick race can often be performed to bring the rains, but also because my previous research, my master's thesis, was about the stories of the Great Gambler and evidence for different pieces, including kick sticks at Chaco. So it's almost like the two roads of my master's research and my PhD have come together around this idea of racing and running on roads. And it's very clearly described in Native histories, and Native people know their own history. So finally, I'm just close with these last thoughts, that practices of construction offering processions and races were among the very acts that created Chaco. So often we get into very personless descriptions of social inequality and regional integration, and that's all important. That's what many of us are interested in archaeology, but I like to bring forth how were the acts and the practices and the experiences of humans crucial to creating that and being shaped by that. And so I think things happening on roads were central to the rise of these larger social processes in the Chaco world. Specifically, these acts on roads, these practices were venues for the display of inequality that also fostered cohesion. Working together on a road as a communal project or processing together really has a lot of potential for, embodying and living a shared vision about the right way to live, the right way to maintain harmony in the cosmos. Roads also left a permanence on the landscape. They were etched into the land. They were these continual blatant reminders of whatever they meant, whether that was the importance of the landform at their end, or the importance of that leader who came from Chaco and told you how to lay out the road, but they were always there, always speaking to people. Almost, you can think of them as a sort of writing on the landscape, a constant presence. That's monuments speak through their permanence, and they're always there. And finally, I've hoped to have emphasized the role of these practices like processions, alignment to astronomy, to landforms, things that I would call religion, in driving these histories and these large scale things like the Chaco world, in contrast to, in addition and together, intertwined with discussions of economics and so forth, that a lot of why people do what they do is because of things we call religion. So with that, I'll close. I thank so many people, especially Navajo Nation, for permission to document these incredible sites on their sovereign and ancestral lands, Bureau of Land Management, Art Conservancy for permits, many funders, and certainly my dissertation committee, and the very generous and knowledgeable longtime researchers of Chaco Roads who have been so generous in taking me into the field and sharing their knowledge. And thank you all for being here and listening. With that, I will stop the share and field some questions.
Just a minute. Thank you so much, Rob. We do have quite a few questions already. Let me just, not that one. I was trying to get the box off the side. Oh, well. Okay. I do have a few questions already, so let's just get right into it. It says, do you have any, well, I think you, let's see. Where did the fossil boulder come from? How far away did it come from, etc.? Do you have anything about that?
That's a great question. It's local rock. It probably was on the cliff or an outcropping there. It's the local sandstone.
Okay.
But I don't think it's not like it tumbled off the cliff all that distance into the middle of that upper bench. So it would appear to have been intentionally placed.
Okay. Was there any evidence of fire, signal, or hearths on top of the upper platform at Llave de la Mano?
Great question. There was no evidence of fire or any sort of feature like that on the platform. It has good visibility, to the south and to the east. You can see Kinya'a from there. You can just barely see Hosta Butte peeking over, the view to the north and especially to the west are pretty blocked. That said, I do like to highlight that there, another small road-related feature I didn't touch on extensively are fireboxes. Often, or there's a few, they're less common than unburned boxes, but there are some sites where the road comes in and there's a small burnt firebox, again, at that sort of liminal transition point between the road and then that sort of inner great house sanctum.
Okay. Do you have any dating on when the construction on the road began relative to the great houses? Do your artifacts show any of that? Or
a challenging issue, one I've thought a lot about. It's hard to say when roads were built. Well, one could imagine a road being built to a location and then a great house being built on that location a few hundred years later. It could have been originally a shrine or even just some kind of small subtle feature. And then in the Chaco era, they said, oh, we're going to build, a great house here. So it's hard to say. We do have, again, at Llave de la Mano and at another location in the Chusca Valley, what appear to be good evidence for Basket Maker 3 era formalized roads. They're not all over the place, but we've got a handful of examples that are pretty compelling. But to date them in a more, how would I say it, robust way is challenging, because you can say, oh, this is the date that sherds were scattered on the road. Well, we know at some places in Chaco, the roads are being swept. Sherds are probably being removed at times. All that is dating, which is good, but that's just dating when the sherds were deposited. Similarly, you can date the endpoint of a road, but as I mentioned, we don't know what's underneath it. Finally, I think there were probably less formalized roads or pathways in previous eras that, just as Chaco really ramped up the monumentality on masonry architecture, so they probably ramped up the monumentality on pre-existing pathways and alignments. And I've thought about attempting to use OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, to try and date curbs on some roads to get an idea of an exact construction date. That may or may not work. I decided not to pursue that as part of my dissertation, but that is an idea in the future to try and get at dates of road construction.
Great, thanks. A couple of questions about the small circles of stones, the boxes. One is it possible that those could just be flanking the road and represent stones that had been piled up around the bases of large trees or something? Like, how can you tell the difference? And then the other is, could they have been manned as sentry points or whatever? Is there any indication of that?
Okay, so the first question is, could they be natural outcroppings that
Right.
trees were in?
Right.
Okay, and the second question is, could they have been manned?
Right.
Yes, well, it's a little hard to describe how you know that they're archaeological features, but their way that they're set into the ground and the lack of anything like a tree stump inside them and their clear association with ancient archaeological features, I think argues very strongly that they are anthropogenic. I've had a team of people from a diversity of backgrounds who have looked at them with me, and there's some cases where it's like, it's unclear, and then we document it as a possible feature. But in so many of these cases, they're very clearly deposited concentrations assessed by multiple sets of eyes and backgrounds of archaeological experience, and concluding that they are certainly anthropogenic archaeological features. and in many cases they have sherds around them too, which I think just further underscores the point. The question of whether they were manned, who knows? Or whether there was a sentry or a greeting person there. I don't think the boxes, because they're so small, I would envision them much more as a place that someone moving along one of these roads left perhaps a small offering or something like that. But I don't think a person would have been in them. The road rooms, on the other hand, yes, they could accommodate people staying in them. It's interesting because sometimes, though, they're right next to the Great House. So maybe that's, again, there's a lot of possibilities that I'm thinking through. But it's a good question to think about. And, you know, there's so far, I'll put it this way, I'll have more answers when we finish the ceramic analysis of assemblages associated with the road rooms. But I can tell you based on the preliminary data, the assemblages of road rooms and great houses are very similar, and they're distinct from the assemblages of the small unit Pueblo domestic sites. So whatever's happening, as shown by ceramic data on the surface at these road rooms, is more similar to what's happening in great houses than what's happening in the domestic sites.
Great, thanks. Might Road Cut Ruin be a typical basket maker site later restored and modified as a roadside structure in Chacoan times?
Yes, it could be. I, again, think without a detailed excavation program, which again is certainly not going to happen, that it's kind of hard to get at the exact history of that site. But it's not, in its current configuration, it's not a blasted through basket maker site. There's a very clear like mound on one side, road, basket maker looking upright slab box. So that is an interesting idea. I mean, could people have later on visited that location and said, we're gonna rebuild this site of the ancestors, rearrange it to configure with the new way we've built this road? That's a great idea. Certainly they were, if it's not originally basket maker, people, again, you know, these Chacoans made choices. They could have gone on either side of the basket maker site and not, they chose to go right there. So engaging with if it is a later feature, engaging with the ancestors was important, but I think it was probably original.
All right. The Great North Road is straight and true north, mostly to better than 1 degree. And this can only be done with reference to the sun and the stars. But it is very hard to get better than 1 degree accuracy, especially on such a large scale. What information do we have as to how the Chaco people surveyed and laid out those roads?
Excellent question. North was not, I would not say it was determined by stars. Experiments by the Solstice project have shown that 1/4 degree of accuracy can be achieved readily using a stick and shadow method. If you want to Google stick and shadow compass, that the details of that technique will be laid out for you. But that's how they determined north. We think you can get, and that's the level of accuracy we see in sections of the North Road and in the walls of buildings, is about 1/4 degree. So they're probably using the stick and shadow method. And then to align roads, to project roads, they use a method called, which is surveyors still use today. It's called backsighting, or sometimes more colloquially, wiggling in, which is, you know, you're standing here and you're holding a flag or pole or something tall. Somebody goes on to the next high point, they look back and, you know, align on you. Someone, you know, then goes to the next high point, and it's this sort of back and forth until all parties are aligned. So, and Steve Lexon has more information about that process in the Chaco Meridian, if you want to really get in the details of determining and extending a north-south line over immense distances.
Great, thanks. I'm going to switch topics a little bit. What is a good resource for learning more about the stick races?
I think they're talked about in the Peter Nabokov's book on Native American running. You could look at my 2018 American Antiquity paper about gambling at Chaco Canyon, where I have quite a few references to the kickstick races from different ethnographies. And probably if you just Google kickstick race pueblos, there are various articles and descriptions online.
Great. All right, let's see what else we have. Little bit more about the rocks. Let's go back there. Could the boxes have sound properties, perhaps ringing rocks?
I love it. The one time I experienced ringing rocks was actually because of AAHS. I was able to go on a field trip to, I don't remember the name of the petroglyph site south of Tucson, but there were these incredible ringing rocks. And I think things like that were very important to people. Sound, we know, is a central part of ceremony, ritual, religion in, I don't want to say every culture, but nearly every culture. So I think these processions probably did involve wonderful sounds of conch shell trumpets and copper bells and singing voices, perhaps some kind of chanting, singing, drumming. I don't see any evidence that the boxes would have been rung. They're mostly made of sandstone, which is not the most acoustically rich stone. I think that site I visited, it was basalt maybe, but I don't think you can ring sandstone. But I really think it's crucial that we think about sound in the movements along Chaco Roads. And David Witt has, and Ruth Van Dyke have been doing really cool recent work thinking about the role of sound in the Chaco world.
Great, thanks. Let's see. There are large rocks that look like pipestone or redstone on the beginning of the area heading up to the platform. I don't know if she's asking if that's the type of rock. Is there pipestone or redstone rocks in that area?
I couldn't say. I'm not familiar with pipestone and redstone. The majority of the rock around there is sandstone. And the thing that really stands out are those purple clasts, but those are also sandstone.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I can't answer that one.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on the short road segments around some outlying great houses?
Yeah, so like the image I showed of Chambers Great House, or especially this principle is shown very clearly at a site I've been working called Kindajoni. In many cases, those short road segments form alignments towards prominent peaks on the horizon. I mean, this is certainly the case. If I may pull up a slide briefly.
Sure.
There are, here it is. This is better than me trying to describe it verbally. Okay, share screen, this one. Here we go. So this is Kindajoni, one of the sites I've been working for my dissertation, and in every case, there are these short roads that spoke out off of it, all less than a mile, sometimes terminating in these road boxes, but they're all aligning to prominent peaks on the horizon. So I think that one type of road are roads that align towards prominent land features, and they're just demarcating an alignment. They're not going all the way there. So I think in many cases, the multiple spokes are pointing at things that are important. In some cases, you can't see what those important things are. Like at Chambers, there's all these roads spoking, but there's nothing on the horizon. Maybe there, and I think that has an interesting connection with the sort of inequality question. In some cases, you have roads, these spoke type roads that are really clearly aligning on something. Anybody at that location could see it. In other cases, maybe that was part of a secret knowledge that, the road goes that way and only those with a certain status or a certain role in society know where that road actually goes. And that could create imbalances, power imbalances. The last thing I'll say on this topic that I appreciate from this question is something I forgot to highlight earlier. Not all roads are the same. You have these big regional roads, which are doing something different than these spoke roads, which are doing different than tie bridge roads. And I think I should have said this earlier, but one of the hindrances in Chaco roads research has been the idea that all roads are the same. I think in some roads, especially the West Road, people did carry goods along into Chaco, timbers, and pottery and so forth. It's probably coming along the West Road. That doesn't mean it's not also creating a ritual movement corridor to the Chuscas as a very important landform. So I wanted to make that point as well.
Great. Okay, we're getting sort of close to time here. So, do you see any evidence of contemporary indigenous people leaving offerings on the roads or otherwise acknowledging them?
If so, I wouldn't show it. I'm not going to say yes or no, and if so, I wouldn't be showing it in a public presentation. But I know that visiting roads with Pueblo people, they really care about them. They're very resonant and they're very interested, and they're considered a very meaningful living part of the culture. And with Navajo as well, they're roads are respected, and they live on. Both the physical features and the broader world they represent of the ancestors and the importance of the ancestors lives on in all the contemporary indigenous societies of the Southwest. But I would not speak about if I'm seeing native use or not, because those are private matters for contemporary native people. But they are very important to Pueblo and Navajo. That I have experienced and feel that I can share.
All right, I'm going to do one last one, and I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions, but there are still a few more. But this person says, I appreciate your presentation and the respect you show for Indigenous culture. I wonder if instead of the word road, you could also use the word way, which to my understanding allows for a more complex, on-the-ground histories that you are uncovering. Comments about that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Road, as part of why I threw the word infrastructure in the title and then tried to subvert that word, is because road, when we hear that word, it conjures up a whole bunch of notions of modernity and transport and economic efficiency and statehood and et cetera, so forth. I don't have a better word. I mean, we can say, I do have slightly more specific vocabulary. For example, those spoke roads we were speaking about a moment ago, those I borrow John Stein's term formalized alignment, because what they really are doing is creating an alignment on the earth towards something significant and formalizing it. Other, is processional way a better term? And we don't, exactly know that. There's no undeniable evidence that processions are happening. So I think we're stuck with road for now because they are so formal. When you hear way or trail or pathway, we think of something narrow and sort of meandering, but these are arrow straight, wide, massive roads. And I think what we need to do is maybe the problem is not with roads themselves, but with expanding our concept of how roads have been used throughout history, which is why I really like the comparative chapter I have in my dissertation. That there's examples of things like this in many ancient and other, more contemporary but non-Western cultures. That roads and road, that word roads continues to be used by Pueblo people today in a variety of ways. It plays into ceremonial life, talking about the road of life, the road for different deities, pathways for pilgrimages, roads play into Navajo culture and sand paintings and the sort of road of safety, the trail of safety. Roads are talked about in a variety of ways. It's, again, as I said, a metaphor for life. And I think also if we move away from the word road, some of those associations that continue in descendant native cultures who are still using that specific, well, of course, they're using indigenous languages, but they're translating that word as road, and that concept has a lot of significance based on my interactions with Pueblo and Navajo people. So I think keeping road is okay for now. That's where I stand, but beginning to conceive of it in a broader sense. And I appreciate what the person said about way, because that it is a way. That word is more expansive, but perhaps we lose some of the precision with that expansion. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. You've given us a lot to think about. We have some questions that we haven't answered. So if any of you have a question that was burning and you really want some feedback on it, you're welcome to email me at that. You'll get a follow-up email at that ARC&HIS address. It's an AAHS 1916@gmail. You're welcome to send that. And also, I want to say, I heard from someone that when I talked about the Research Slam, I might have said March. It's not March, it's January 10th at 6:30, and it will be on Zoom, and information is going out shortly. So thank you so much, Rob, for all of your information and taking all this time with us this evening. And everyone have a happy holidays, and we will see you at the Slam on January 10th. Thanks.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks, everybody.
Good
Have
night,
a beautiful
everyone.
night. Happy solstice.
Thanks.